Alright, I managed to get my hands on a full set of the brand new Masterwork Magic Armour yesterday, and today I want to put it through the ringer, test it out, share my thoughts, and figure out whether this is a must-have upgrade or just another flashy and forgettable noob trap. So let's dive in. Timestamps will be in the description if you wanted to skip around, but broadly I'm going to cover the armor itself, I'm going to compare it to Elite Tectonic, I'm going to talk a little bit about mixing and matching pieces of magic gear, then we'll do some tests at high Enrage Zamorak and some general combat tests, and we'll wrap up the video with a DPM comparison. So quick intro, this armor dropped with the 110 crafting update. It's a tier 99 power set, meaning its stats are going to be a direct upgrade over tier 92 Elite Tectonic. What's interesting today is that this set actually offers a higher life bonus than even Crypt Bloom armor, and that's unusual since life point bonuses are typically reserved for tank armor, with the one real exception being Nex armors that try to blur the line between being tank and power gear. Now that hybrid feel is going to be one of Masterwork Magic's biggest strengths today, and that brings us to the set effect. Here's how the set effect works. Wearing at least 3 pieces of the Masterwork Magic gear causes each piece to offset 10% of incoming damage and then spread out the remainder of that damage over the next 6 seconds. So if you got smacked by a 10,000 damage hit while wearing 5 pieces of the gear, you'll immediately take a 5,000 damage hit, and the remaining 5,000 damage will slowly get dripped onto your character over time. You're still taking the full damage, but because it softens out that front-loaded hit, you're going to be much harder to KO, even against big, powerful, damaging attacks. When you combine that with the life point bonus, you've basically got something that feels like tank armor, but with full offensive stats. So let's talk about those offensive stats and directly compare them to Elite Tectonic. Elite Tectonic and the other pieces of best-in-slot magic gear, like the Blast Diffusion boots and the enhanced Carapax gauntlets, would give you a total of 119 power bonus. Masterwork Magic gives you 145. And the classic rule of thumb that I remember is that each point of power bonus is roughly a 0.06% DPS increase. So in raw numbers, going from Elite Tectonic to Masterwork Magic is about a 1.56% DPS boost. Now, that 1% DPS increase might not seem like a huge difference, but it's not the only consideration when it comes to power bonus anymore. More recently, with the introduction of the Temporal Anomaly spell, power bonus plays a more prevalent role in magic DPS. The more power bonus you have, the more likely you are to trigger the effects of the Temporal Anomaly spell and instantly reset the cooldowns of powerful abilities like Omnipower. So previously with Tectonic alone, you would have a 15% chance to trigger a Temporal Anomaly reset. Now, with Masterwork Magic, that number jumps up to 18.125%. To put that increase in perspective, let's say you were able to do an hour of non-stop PVM, taking away factors like banking or phase transitions. Pretend that you were just in combat for an hour straight and casting abilities every 1.8 seconds. You could in theory cast 2,000 abilities per hour, so wearing Tectonic, you could expect about 300 Temporal Anomaly resets per hour. That number then jumps up to 363 resets per hour with Masterwork Magic. Of course, there's a lot more nuance than that, and a lot of elements of RNG, whether you're being lucky on resetting powerful or weak abilities, but going from 300 to 363 is a significant jump. So at a glance, it seems like Masterwork Magic is just an all-around upgrade over Tectonic, and in a lot of ways, it absolutely is. There is, however, one really big factor that might keep Tectonic alive for a while longer, and that's Tectonic's passive effect. Tectonic's passive effect grants you 2% critical strike chance per piece worn, so up to 6% extra crits total. Because Magic is such a critical strike-oriented style, especially once you have a Fasoa, that's something we definitely can't ignore. 6% extra crit chance is a big deal, and while the increased power stats of Masterwork Magic does mean that you'll likely roll higher damage values when you do crit, you probably won't be critting quite as consistently as you would with Tectonic equipped instead. So there is a little bit of trade-off there. I would say that you can either forego Tectonic and just take this straight power upgrade and take on the attitude, well, I'll just crit when I crit. Or you can go for the more consistent crit option and stick to all-reliable Tectonic. Or we can take a peek behind door number 3 and talk about mixing and matching armor pieces. So I'm going to go slot by slot quickly here and determine what's the best piece of armor in every slot. First off, the most simple, boots. Always wear Masterwork Magic. These are simply going to be your new best-in-slot boots, and if you absolutely must make use of the Detonate ability, you can bring Blast Diffusion boots with you as a switch, but I can't really think of too many times outside of AoE scenarios that you really want to use Detonate right now, so safe to say that Masterwork are going to be your new best-in-slot. The gloves are going to be a similar story. you're generally always going to want to wear Masterwork Magic gloves now. Unless you're really trying to min-max some kind of rotation with Dragon Breath and Combust interaction of Carapax Gauntlets, Masterwork Magic is going to be your new best in slot. The only exception to that is if your target is poisonable, like Solak or Glacior. In that case, Cinderbanes are still going to be your go-to. But otherwise, Masterwork Magic gloves and boots are clear go-tos. Now the big three slots: the helmet, the body, and the legs. Truthfully, I think you're fine either way if you wanted to go 3-piece Tectonic or 3-piece Masterwork. If you really wanted to be creative and try mixing and matching pieces, I think you should probably take a Tectonic helmet for the 2% crit chance, and that way you would sacrifice the least amount of power bonus compared to the other pieces. Then you would still take the Masterwork body and legs since they have higher bonuses overall. It definitely looks pretty goofy, but I think there's potential that we're going to be seeing some setups like this with mixed and match pieces for the sake of critical strike consistency. Me personally though, I think I'm honestly just going to stick with 5-piece Masterwork more often than not. Based on my testing that you're about to see, I don't really miss the crit chance that much, and the armor feels powerful enough on its own and like it's a solid step up, even if I am giving up a little bit of crit chance. So I mentioned these goofy looking mix and match setups because I do think there is room to play around with some different combinations of gear and stack some effects. And there might actually be an optimal combination of effects between a few pieces of Masterwork, Tectonic, and Crit Bloom for damage or for tanking. But for us more casual gamers, I would say just pick whatever you like best, or stick with the new Masterwork Magic Armour for simplicity. That said, let's finally get into some live testing. I am going to start out at high Enrage Zamorak today, doing some 2000% solo kills with 5-piece Masterwork Armour. I am also pushing and working towards 4000% Enrage, so I am going to try some pushing kills with this gear, but for now 2000% seems like a solid place to start. So far, I've really only ever done Zamorak with Crit Bloom armor since that's my comfort zone. Using Crit Bloom and Animate Dead reduces a lot of melee and magic damage, and makes high Enrage Zamorak a lot more accessible for me. So I'm already used to the idea of sacrificing that Tectonic crit benefit, and I've never really had a problem with crits here. Once in a while you'll have an outlier kill where something goes a little wacky, sure, but generally Crit Bloom and this slower approach is perfectly serviceable for me. When I switched it up to the Masterwork gear today, I found things to be pretty interesting. This was actually my first time ever killing 2000% Enrage Zamorak with Magic Power Armor instead of Crit Bloom, and having that set effect was really noticeable, especially once I compared it to doing some kills with Tectonic. Offsetting 50% of the damage made the phases a lot more manageable for me, and honestly it didn't feel that far off of using my Crit Bloom as far as my tankiness goes. I was able to do fairly good damage in the phases thanks to the power bonus, and I was able to survive quite easily thanks to the life point bonus and that damage offset. Every time I would finish a phase and teleport into the Infernus to deal with the Witch, the remainder of my Masterwork bleed would usually finish, and it felt like I was almost able to get a complete reset every phase. I was never overwhelmed by that Masterwork bleed is what I'm saying. Looking at a couple of the phase 7s, it's especially interesting when I compare it against Tectonic. I had a much more difficult time surviving when I was using Tectonic. The big melee slam and the subsequent blast attacks completely destroyed me, and they would activate my Ring of Death early, meaning that I failed most of the kills I attempted with Tectonic today. But with Masterwork, the damage from those attacks would get offset, and my Ring of Death would either activate much later or not even activate at all. So I essentially had 2 fail safes that would prolong my attempts at phase 7. I had the Masterwork offset and I had the Ring of Death. I'm going to play a clip of an absolute disaster phase 7 where I somehow managed to survive long enough through a Ring of Death proc and with the Masterwork bleed long enough to secure the kill. I don't think I would have been able to do this with Tectonic. So overall, I've got to give the armor really high marks at Zamorak. I think this is going to be a much more approachable way of learning this boss and any boss and pushing to high Enrage for a lot of people. You're kind of getting the best of both worlds from tank armor and power armor here. So that brings me to some of my pushing kills where I started experimenting with a mix and match setup of the armor. So I used my cozy Crit Bloom that I've been used to for so long, except I paired it with 3 pieces of Masterwork. I went with the hat, the gloves, and the boots, and then I just kept my Crit Bloom top and legs. The idea here is that I'm offsetting 30% of damage thanks to the Masterwork, and I'm still benefiting from the 2-piece Crit Bloom passive effect paired with Animate Dead. Now this setup really felt quite strong to me, and I actually really liked this, especially when it came down to the last 3 phases of the fight, which for me are often the scariest and the most difficult. You can see in phase 7, I'm now stacking so many defensive buffs that I feel invincible. I have 3 pieces of Masterwork taking away 30% damage. I have 2 pieces of Crypt Bloom, and I have the Darkness incantation activated. It's a bit goofy looking, but it's extremely powerful, and I managed to push an extra 100% Enrage really quickly today by using this setup. So that's definitely going to be something I'm going to continue to experiment with here, but so far I have nothing but praise for the Masterwork Armour at Zamorak. Zamorak is where I did spend the most of my time testing the Masterwork Armour so far, but I did also go to a few other bosses, and this armor performs as well as you would want it to and expect it to for a high level piece of gear. It packs the punch that you need from power armor, and it keeps you alive. At Raksha, for instance, I was able to mindlessly tank rocks during the phase transitions. At Solak, it was fine if I ever tanked a couple of extra blight bombs, and at high Enrage Archglacior or Telos, you have more leeway with missing some prayer flicks and surviving the generally higher hitting auto attacks. All the while, you'll be outputting good damage too. The last test that I did was a challenge barrel test, and for this I'm just going to do my very best with Tectonic and Temporal Anomaly, as well as every other buff I can think of that's available to me, including things like Grimoire and Calgarian Demon. And then I'll do the exact same thing with 5-piece Masterwork. Now, this isn't a perfectly scientific test by any means. There's always going to be a little bit of variance between things like my own performance, and especially as I'm introducing the temporal anomaly as a big variable. But it should still give us some kind of idea of how these armors stack against each other. And I'm interested to see if the critical strike chance from Tectonic can outweigh the power bonus and the extra temporal reset chance from Masterwork. It's worth noting, when I did do this test, ironically, I actually got a few more temporal resets on big abilities with my Tectonic. You might see in the background that I got like 7 tsunamis and a few extra soulfire resets as well. But my final DPM number with Tectonic ended up being 477,000. Like I said, I had a couple less temporal resets with the Masterwork gear, which does seem a little bit funny, but that's just RNG at the end of the day. Interestingly enough though, my end result was ever so slightly higher, at 480,000 DPM. Overall, I thought that was an interesting result. I mean, it's not the most conclusive test in the world, of course, and the result is only a hair of difference, but in my opinion, this tracks. That 1% DPS from the stats, and in theory, the extra temporal anomaly resets, would make this armor marginally stronger than Tectonic overall. So my spicy take after my day of testing, I am going to claim that this is the new best magic armor in the game, at least until a mask kit comes out. I think this is going to be the new favorite armor set for a lot of folks wanting to get into Magic. It's going to feel a lot more comfortable than Tectonic for a lot of players when it comes to learning bosses, and it's going to output just a ton of damage. So going forward, until a mask kit is released, this is going to be the first big Magic upgrade I'm going to recommend to people whenever they ask me. I think you'll want to prioritize getting this armor set about as highly as you would prioritize getting a Fasoa. It really felt great to use, and I'm pumped to see that the game seems to be slowly shifting back to a Magic meta with releases like this and the upcoming Amaskit release. I'm telling you, it's going to be a great year for Wizards coming up. So that is going to be where I call this video. Let me know what you thought about my testing and if any of the results surprised you. Are you going to pick up a set of this armor now? If you enjoyed this video or found it informative, share it with a friend. Subscribe to my channel for more RS content just like this. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.